The morning I came back from a week-long fishing trip and found a pile of rubble where my lakefront mansion used to be, I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just sat on the hood of my truck, stared at the disaster, and opened a can of root beer, because I knew exactly who did it. "Kendora Briggs," I muttered, watching her strut across the lawn like she owned the damn place. Shoulder pads, clipboard, and that same sour expression like someone just told her the world didn't revolve around her. She was president of the Lakewood Pines HOA, and she'd been trying to make my life hell since the first day she realized I wasn't the type to bow to her rules. "Quarren? Oh, thank God you're back," she said, planting herself in front of me like she hadn't just reduced my house to ash. "We've been trying to reach you for weeks. You were delinquent on your dues, and per Section 5, subsection C, we had no choice but to reclaim and dispose of the property." "Dispose?" I raised an eyebrow. "You bulldozed a 4-bedroom lakefront mansion. You were warned," she said, flipping through her clipboard. "Multiple notices, final warnings. We followed protocol to the letter." I leaned forward. "And who signed the demolition order?" "I did," she smiled, proud of herself. "As acting treasurer and president, it was within my authority." "Right," I said, standing up. She took a step back. "You might have forgotten something," I said, brushing dust off my jeans. "I bought this entire development 3 years ago, every lot, including yours." Her face twitched. "That's a lie. The HOA owns." "No," I interrupted. "You manage, I own. I let the HOA keep operating because I didn't want to deal with trash collection, lawn regulations, and all that nonsense. You were a convenience, but now." I looked at the crater where my house used to be. "Now we've got a problem." "You're bluffing," she said, voice cracking just a bit. I pulled a folded deed from my back pocket and held it up. "County Registrar, signed, notarized, and dated. You see that line right there? That's my name, Quarren Wesley, owner of Lakewood Pines Estates." She snatched the paper like she could erase the ink with sheer willpower. Her eyes darted across the page. Her lips moved, reading silently, and then her face went pale. "I'll be calling an emergency board meeting," she whispered. "You do that," I said. "But you're going to want to call a lawyer too, because you just authorized the demolition of private property worth over $2 million. On land that doesn't belong to you. That's criminal damage, Kendora." She didn't say anything, just turned and walked off fast. I watched her go, then looked back at the rubble. She really thought she could bully me like everyone else in this neighborhood. She was about to find out what happens when you try to crush the wrong guy. By the time the afternoon sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the scorched footprint of my former home, I'd already made 3 phone calls, none of them to lawyers. Not yet. First was to the sheriff's office, second to the county assessor's office, and the third to my contractor, who owed me a favor the size of a new foundation. Deputy Carson arrived first, crunching gravel beneath his boots as he stepped out of his cruiser and pushed his sunglasses up his nose. "Quarren," he said, eyeing the remains of my house. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." "It's exactly what you think it is," I said, handing him a folder. "Demolition order signed by someone with no legal authority on land they don't own." He flipped through the papers, jaw tightening. "You serious? She actually went through with this?" "She did. I came back from a week off and found the house gone. No court order, no lien, nothing but nerve." He let out a low whistle and pulled out his notepad. "You got security footage?" 2 angles. One from the dock, one from the west tree line. Both caught the crew and her giving the go-ahead. "Perfect," he said. "I'll need copies of that, and if you've got the contractor info, I'll be having a word with them too." She used a service out of county, no licensing, no permits. "I already looked them up. Just a demolition crew for hire, cash only." He scrawled something furiously, then looked up. "If she hired them off the books and destroyed private property without a court mandate, that's felony criminal damage." "You want to press charges?" "I want the full weight of the law," I said. He nodded once and turned back toward his cruiser. "I'll file the report tonight. This is gonna be loud, Quarren." "You good with that?" "I'm counting on it." As he drove off, a gray SUV pulled into the cul-de-sac and parked crookedly across two driveways. Out stepped a woman in her early 60s with a sharp bob and a pearl necklace that looked like it hadn't come off since the Reagan administration. She marched over with the confidence of someone used to being listened to without question. "You owe this community an explanation," she snapped. "Kendora said you were hiding from your responsibilities, and now you're trying to play the victim." I studied her face. "And you are Margaret Tilling." "HOA Vice President, I helped pass the vote to remove your property." "There was no legal mechanism for that vote. It wasn't your land. You couldn't remove anything." "That's where you're wrong," she said, lifting her chin. "We have it in the bylaws non-payment of dues forfeits your rights." "Not ownership," I said. "You can fine, you can restrict amenities, but you can't seize or destroy property. That's not how property law works." Her lips thinned. "You think the rest of the board's going to stand by while you tear down everything we've built here?" "I'm not tearing anything down. You already did that. I'm just making sure the courts build something better in its place." She turned on her heel and stormed off without another word. I watched her drive away, then walked back to my truck and opened the cooler in the bed, pulled out a bottle of water and leaned against the tailgate. 20 minutes later, a white sedan rolled up. County assessor. A guy named Lindell I'd worked with back when I first bought the land. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. "Wesley," he said, "heard about the demo, figured you'd want me to bring the plats." "You read my mind," I said. He handed me a map marked with parcel numbers, boundary lines, and color-coded ownership. My name was stamped across every residential lot, including the one Kendora called home. "I need you to certify this and send copies to the sheriff's office and the district clerk," I said. "No problem," he said. "You want me to flag any zoning violations while I'm at it, as many as you can find." He smiled faintly, then got back in his car. By dusk, I had a rough sketch of how this was going to play out. The HOA had committed an act so far outside their authority it wasn't just a civil issue anymore, it was criminal. They didn't just overstep. They trespassed, destroyed private property, and possibly used HOA funds to pay for the whole thing. That meant embezzlement, too. And I wasn't going to let this slide. That night, I stayed at my cabin across the lake, technically still part of the development, though hidden behind a private access road and a thick wall of pines. I reviewed the footage, clipped the clearest shots of Kendora giving the demolition crew instructions, and uploaded everything to an external drive. I also drafted a formal complaint to the state HOA regulatory board, complete with supporting documents, timeline, and sworn affidavits from my groundskeeper and former property manager, both of whom had been approached by HOA board members in the past month, asking if I was still active in the neighborhood. They were digging for excuses. Too bad they picked the wrong guy to dig up dirt on. By morning, word had spread. The neighborhood's online forum, which I'd never posted in, but always monitored, was in full-blown meltdown. Half the threads were titled Demolition. Or Can HOA really do this? Or Why is Kendora hiding? I didn't post. I didn't have to. I let them stew. Instead, I met with my attorney, a woman named Nadira Patel, who used to be a federal prosecutor before opening her own firm. I laid out everything: documents, footage, timelines, emails. She flipped through the folders, eyebrows lifting higher with each page. "They're not just in trouble," she said. "They're done. You've got them on at least 3 felonies: destruction of property, misuse of funds, and conspiracy. If they coordinated this together, that's a RICO violation." "I want the HOA disbanded," I said. "Not just sued, gone, burned to the ground, legally speaking." She nodded. "We'll file for an injunction to freeze their bank account first, then we'll move to dissolve the board pending investigation. Once criminal charges are filed, the rest will collapse." I left her office feeling lighter than I had in days. Not because the fight was over, it wasn't even close, but because I knew the exact path forward, and it was paved with truth and ironclad evidence. The next morning, Deputy Carson called. "We picked up Kendora this morning," he said. She tried to stonewall us, but once we showed her the footage and the ownership records, she lawyered up. Good, I said. Let her dig her own hole. There's more, he added. We got a subpoena for the HOA's financials. Looks like she was skimming maintenance funds into a private account. Might explain how she paid for the crew. I whistled. That's bold, stupid too. We've already frozen the account. County DA is interested. You might get your wish on that dissolution. I hung up and stared out at the empty patch where my home used to stand. There was wind coming off the lake, crisp and cool. Justice was coming, and it wasn't just going to rebuild what I lost. It was going to clean house. I was standing in the community garden, what used to be a gravel lot before I had it landscaped into something halfway decent, when the first real break came from the sheriff's office. A black SUV rolled to a stop on the path, tires crunching over the fresh mulch I'd paid for last spring. Out stepped a tall man in a blue suit, his badge clipped to his belt. "Mr. Wesley," he asked, adjusting his collar. "Special Agent Redden, State Bureau of Investigation. I'm overseeing the Financial Crimes Unit handling your case." I handed him a folder I'd been holding. "That's the HOA's last 3 years of annual reports. Their version, anyway. I compared them to the bank records your office subpoenaed." He flipped through them, pausing at a page flagged with a yellow tab. $55,000 in community beautification expenses, but no invoices, no contractor names. That's a problem. "There's more," I said, leading him toward the maintenance shed. I had a forensic accountant look over the statements. Turns out there's been a pattern of withdrawals just under the reporting threshold, always in cash, always made within 2 days of board meetings. "That's textbook structuring," he muttered, "trying to avoid detection. And if the payments funded the demo crew, that ties it directly to the destruction of your property." I opened the shed door. Inside were dozens of file boxes stacked neatly. Redden stepped in and ran a hand along the labels. "These all from the HOA. They stored records here before the last president resigned. I made copies before Kendora moved them to her garage. She thought she was covering her tracks." He pulled out a binder labeled Vendor Contracts Year 2 and flipped it open. "There's no license number on this contractor, no tax ID, no insurance certificate. You sure this is who knocked your place down?" "Positive," I said. I had the footage enhanced. The logo on their truck matches the name listed their Pine Ridge Hauling and Demo, but that company doesn't exist in any state database. He snapped the binder shut. Then someone created a shell company, likely just a name and burner phone. Whoever they hired, they didn't want a paper trail. I locked the shed behind us as we stepped out. "What's the next move?" "Now we trace the cash," he said. "If Kendora or anyone on her board deposited that money into a personal account, we've got them. And if they coordinated with an unlicensed crew to destroy private property, that's conspiracy and fraud on top of criminal damage." I nodded. "Good. Let's make sure this doesn't get swept under a rug." He gave me a firm nod and walked back to his SUV, already dialing his phone. Later that evening, I met with the neighborhood social committee not because I wanted to join, but because they'd asked for help. The group had mostly been used as a mouthpiece for the board, but since Kendora's arrest, the members were scrambling to distance themselves. "We didn't know what she was doing," said Eliza, a retired schoolteacher who'd lived here for over 2 decades. "She told us you were avoiding dues and planning to sell the land to developers." I leaned forward. "You believed that without checking. She threatened to shut down our event's budget if we questioned anything," another member added. "Said she'd remove us from the committee." "So you kept quiet," I said, "even when she bulldozed a house." They looked at each other, uncomfortable. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "But if you knew even a fraction of what she was doing and said nothing, you'll be asked about it when the subpoenas come." Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her purse. She pulled out a thumb drive and placed it on the table. "We kept copies of every meeting agenda, even the ones she told us to delete. Some of them mention off books arrangements and discretionary enforcement." I didn't understand what it meant until now. I pocketed the drive. That's the kind of thing that might save this community. When I got home to the cabin that night, I reviewed the files. The agendas were vague, but they included notes about targeted enforcement and reclaiming delinquent properties. One entry mentioned my name next to the phrase "final phase." That was the nail I needed. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and submitted the documents as part of my civil suit. The clerk at the counter raised her eyebrows when she saw the volume of evidence. "You sure you don't want to wait for the criminal case to wrap?" she asked. "I'm not waiting for anything," I said. "I want the civil suit running parallel. That way, when the indictments hit, we're already rolling." From there, it escalated fast. Within 72 hours, subpoenas were issued to every sitting board member. 2 tried to resign outright, but the court froze all changes to the HOA's structure pending investigation. The sheriff's department posted a public notice on the community bulletin board. All HOA activities suspended until further notice. All fines, fees, and enforcement actions are void. That was the moment the tide turned. Neighbors who had kept their heads down started knocking on my door. Some brought coffee, others brought files. One man, a landscaper named Miguel, handed me a folder with receipts for work he was never paid for. "She said the board would settle up at the end of the fiscal year," he said quietly, "but it's been over a year." I added it to the growing stack of unpaid invoices and bogus expenses. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to file for a court-appointed receiver to take over HOA operations. My attorney, Nadira, walked into the hearing with a confidence that made the opposing lawyer, a junior partner hired by the board's emergency fund, look like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "The HOA has failed in its fiduciary duties," Nadira said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Our client has demonstrated not only financial impropriety, but deliberate criminal acts carried out under the guise of neighborhood governance. We respectfully request the court appoint a neutral third party to dissolve the current leadership and conduct a full audit." The judge, a woman with a reputation for zero patience, looked over the thick binder we'd submitted. "You're requesting dissolution?" she asked. "I'm requesting eradication," Nadira corrected. "This board is a danger to its residents and an insult to the concept of community management." The judge tapped her pen once, then twice before saying, "Petition granted. A receiver will be appointed. All current board members are hereby suspended from any HOA-related activity pending investigation." The board's attorney slumped like someone had pulled the bones out of him. Outside the courthouse, a news van was parked with its antenna raised. A reporter was already speaking into the camera as I and Nadira walked past. Shocking revelations about the HOA leadership at Lakewood Pines, including allegations of embezzlement, property destruction, and illegal contracting. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That night, for the first time in weeks, I stood at the edge of the crater where my house used to be. The air was quiet. No construction noise, no arguments, just the sound of wind through the trees, and then something I didn't expect, applause. I turned. A group of neighbors, dozens of them, stood at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Some clapped. Others just nodded. No one said anything. They didn't have to. The board was gone. The corruption was exposed. And this neighborhood? It was mine to rebuild, not just the house, the entire community. Construction on the new house began before the week was out. Not a copy of the old one, this one was better. Angled glass walls overlooking the lake, a wide wraparound deck, geothermal heating, and a reinforced safe room that doubled as an office. I'd learned a thing or two about security. The crew I hired was local, licensed, and had worked with me before people who didn't ask questions they didn't need answers to. But while the house rose from the ashes, something far more satisfying was being dismantled across the street. The temporary court-appointed receiver, a retired judge named Marion Belt, wasted no time. She arrived in the neighborhood with a portable folding desk, a box of legal pads, and a personal assistant who logged every HOA record down to individual landscaping reimbursements. In less than 72 hours, she issued a community-wide notice. All HOA governance suspended indefinitely. All enforcement actions nullified. All board members barred from conducting business on behalf of Lakewood Pines. I watched her pin the notice to the old HOA bulletin board, once a monument to Kendora's endless citations and passive-aggressive reminders about lawn edging. Now, it was a relic. "I've never seen embezzlement this open-ended," Marion said without looking at me. "You're not even through the files. I don't need to be." The checks were written to herself. She pulled out a file and flipped it open, revealing 3 canceled checks with Kendora's name on both the pay-to and signed by lines, each labeled Community Expense Misc. "You know what she listed as miscellaneous?" Marion asked. "Let me guess, gasoline for HOA patrols, laser hair removal, Miami." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. That afternoon, subpoenas started landing like bricks. The deputy clerk hand delivered them to 5 former board members still living in the neighborhood. One tried to slam the door in his face. The other 4 just stood there, stunned, clutching the papers like they might catch fire. I stayed out of it. I didn't need to gloat. They were already being buried under the weight of their own hubris. At the county courthouse the following week, the criminal trial began. It wasn't flashy, no cameras, no headlines, but it was brutal. Kendora's attorney tried to argue that she had acted in the best interests of the community, but the judge cut him off before he finished the sentence. "You authorized the destruction of private property you did not own, using funds you had no authority to access. That's not community service, that's fraud." The prosecution's case was airtight. They presented bank records, video footage, forged contractor documents, and testimony from the demolition crew who claimed they were told the structure was condemned and the owner had vanished. When asked why they didn't verify anything, one of the workers shrugged and said, "She paid in cash. Told us she was with the city." The courtroom went dead silent. Kendora didn't testify. She sat stiffly in her chair, face pale, fingers clenched together in her lap. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts, she didn't flinch. She just stared straight ahead while the judge listed the charges aloud: felony criminal mischief, wire fraud, felony theft, and abuse of fiduciary duty. She was sentenced to 6 years in state custody with no parole for the first 3. The rest of the board got varying penalties: fines, probation, mandatory restitution. One of them, a man named Calvin, who had once threatened to fine a neighbor for hanging a wind chime, cried when the judge handed him a 2-year sentence for aiding and abetting. I didn't attend their sentencing hearings. Instead, I focused on rebuilding more than just my home. The receiver held a vote, one last official act before dissolving the HOA entirely. Every lot owner was given the choice: form a new, transparent community council or leave governance to the county and manage issues independently. The vote wasn't even close. 95% chose freedom. The HOA was disbanded within 48 hours. The decorative sign at the neighborhood entrance, the one that used to read Lakewood Pines, a community of excellence, was quietly removed. In its place, a wooden marker now read, Lakewood Pines Private Community, no HOA. It was beautiful. Neighbors who had once been pitted against each other by Kendora's reign of citations and fines started talking again. The man who used to be fined for leaving his trash cans visible helped me raise the new dock. The couple who'd been threatened with eviction over their solar panels invited me to dinner. Little by little, the neighborhood began to stitch itself back together. One afternoon, Eliza, the retired schoolteacher who'd handed me the thumb drive, brought over a bundt cake and asked if I'd consider hosting a community bonfire at the lakeshore. "Feels symbolic," she said. I agreed. That Saturday night, under a sky full of stars, we lit the biggest fire the lake had seen in years. People brought chairs, drinks, homemade pie. Someone played guitar. Kids ran barefoot along the edge of the water. At the center of it all was a pile of old HOA signs, rusted enforcement notices, and one clipboard that Eliza swore had once belonged to Kendora herself. When the fire caught and the clipboard curled into blackened ash, someone let out a cheer. No one stopped them. Later that evening, I stepped away from the crowd and stood at the edge of the lake, watching the reflection of the fire ripple across the water. Marion joined me, sipping from a thermos. "You did more than take down a corrupt board," she said. "You gave these people a second chance." "They gave themselves one," I said. "I just cleared the path," she nodded. "Still, not many would have had the foresight to keep the land in their name. I learned a long time ago ownership is leverage. And leverage beats intimidation every time." She smiled, then tipped her thermos toward me in a silent toast. By the time the fire burned down to glowing embers, most of the crowd had drifted home. The air smelled like cedar and charred paper. Somewhere across the lake, an owl hooted once, low and steady. Rebuilding the house had been easy. Rebuilding the community that had taken real work, but we'd done it. And as I looked out across the quiet neighborhood, no HOA patrols, no rogue board members, no threats of fines for a mailbox that didn't match the others, I knew we weren't just free. We were finally home.